I mean, yesterday we were here in the morning discussing what we expected the finance minister will touch on. Did those come to pass? What more is contained in this budget?
In fact, I would say that about 90% of the things we said the finance minister was going to touch on, indeed, he touched on them. So he gave us a clear indication of when he thinks the COVID-19 levy will go. We'll talk more on that. He spoke about the return to the debt market or the bonds market. He spoke about that, told the success story of the economy, and he actually did that. And in fact, he also made mention or spoke about the wage bill, which was so important going into this year's budget. And in fact, on PM Express, gave further and better details on stored projects, the Big Push initiative, roles that will benefit from the current allocation and what have you. But what we learned yesterday from that mid-year budget review was that he was very clear that he doesn't need additional funding. So he's not going to request for supplementary budget for 2025. It simply means that he's going to stay within the 291 billion Ghana cedis appropriation that was sent to Parliament in March. But one thing we are also learning from the data we've seen so far and what he said yesterday is that revenue has been revised upward to 229 billion Ghana cedis from the 227 billion earlier projected in the main budget. What does it do? This will reduce the deficit that in the appropriation hit more than 66 billion Ghana cedis. So what this is going to do is that the new revenue handles will possibly close the gap. And then also he talked about, other things that, we have to focus on. But in terms of the stored projects, we will do more analysis on that. Okay. But the additional revenue, which is about 2.9 billion, is what yesterday was very important to put across. So, because once you decide to keep your expenditure the same and increase revenue, what happens is that your budget deficit is going to go, down. And we need to go through the deficits. Currently, he is quoting at 40.5 billion Ghana cedis. But if you go into the appropriation proper and you do the analysis, you will see that the real deficit is more than this figure. It's about 60 billion Ghana, more than 60 billion Ghana cedis if you do the real calculation, because appropriation in terms of expenditure is about 291 billion versus currently 229 billion in revenue. Definitely your deficit will exceed 60 billion.
So, but he said, so if it is 60 billion, why are they telling us it's 40 billion? Could there be an explanation?
Well, it's not wrong. It depends on the accounting tangent that you choose to stand on. Okay. Right? If you decide to take away arrears clearance and amortization, definitely the deficit will come down.
But are these expenditures?
Or actually expenditure, and they form part of the real appropriation. So, Seth Tekpe will tell you that if you really want to understand the budget, go to the appropriation and not the one without amortization and expenditure. Because we have done the analysis and we've realized that if you do the real appropriation, deficit is more than this 40.5 billion. It's in excess of 60 billion Ghana cedis. Because the first one that he presented to Parliament in March, we did a calculation and we got a deficit of close to 66 billion Ghana cedis. Okay. And so if you add 2.9 billion revenue to it, that will reduce the deficit to some, let's say, 63 billion Ghana cedis. That's about $6.3 billion that we are talking about in deficit.
But mustn't we be worried if we are now being told it is 60 when it is actually 60? Over 60.
That's what I'm saying. That he's not wrong to quote 40.5 because he is not looking at the deficits, including amortization and arrears clearance. Because he's already made a point that if you look at the amortization aspect or the arrears clearance aspect, there are contracts or arrears that they have to pay that he thinks that auditing must be done. Okay. And already he has earmarked 13 billion Ghana cedis to pay arrears this year. But his concern is that if he looks at the data, the outstanding arrears that we have to clear was close to 68 billion Ghana cedis, and some form of auditing must be done before he commits money into paying. But all we are saying is that if you add what exists in the appropriation, we could have a budget deficit which is close to 63 billion Ghana cedis that will possibly be paid in 2025. But he said this. He says, prudent debt management exchange rate appreciation has resulted in significant improvement in Ghana's debt profile. And Kojo, you remember, we did the projection somewhere March, before the budget was read, I think somewhere April, that looking at how the cedi was appreciating, we were expecting that by the first half of the year, Ghana's debt stock should go down by some 100 billion Ghana cedis. Yesterday, he actually affirmed that projection we did, and he said it actually went down by 113.7 billion Ghana cedis. That is very significant. In fact, if you do the math, what you see is that this is even bigger than the breathing space we got by doing the debt exchange program. So we gave people haircuts and what have you, but the savings we had was nowhere close to 114 billion Ghana cedis. It tells you that the entire economy revolves around exchange rate. Once you keep exchange rate in check, the energy sector will be stable, your debt situation will improve and all of that. So if you are able to solve the exchange rate situation, definitely what happens is that it will affect all other indicators, especially inflation, because of the pass-through effects of exchange rate and the fact that we depend so much on imports. And our import bill is on average about 13 to 14 billion dollars every year. So if you're able to tackle exchange rate, definitely all other economic indicators will follow. It's not as simple as that, but in fact, that is what the regression actually says. Yesterday, he also says that the public debt to GDP ratio at the end of June 2025 was 43.8%. This is unprecedented. Looking at where we've come so far, the restructuring we've done, at a point, our debt to GDP ratio, if you consider all other factors, was in excess of 100% to our GDP. In fact, it means that in terms of our production as a country, if we decide to use everything to pay debt 2 or 3 years ago, it would not have been possible because it was somewhere around 114%. But after the restructuring, we hit some 61.8%. That was a massive improvement. But now we are talking about 43.8%, not because of restructuring, not because we are not borrowing, but it's simply because the exchange rate situation has improved.
But are we borrowing?
Yeah, we are borrowing, but he said that we are borrowing, I want to use the word wisely, or we are borrowing as and when we need that money. But if you domestically, but we all know what happened, 3 or 4 years ago, where Eurobonds were the order of the day, get 3 billion, we're issuing 0% coupon rate and all of that. What happens is that once you begin to add dollar debt and your exchange rate begins to fail you, without even adding more debt, without even borrowing, you add more debt, because the finance minister in the 2023 budget had told us that in 2022, they added more than 90 billion Ghana cedis to the debt stock, not because they borrowed, but because the exchange rate failed them. So it's not surprising to see the same sort of, story playing out here, but this time around, it's appreciation of the cedi. And what is that saving us? 113 billion Ghana cedis in reducing our debt stock. Now, you can look at the curve this way. This is where the success story, the entire success story is coming from. And he has said that gold board is big in this success story, but not the sole reason why we are seeing it. But he says currently we are getting more inflows from the gold board initiative, which means that Bank of Ghana now has the power to come into the market to intervene. Yesterday, when Evans asked him about intervention, he said, there's nothing wrong. If Bank of Ghana has what it takes and it's not burning reserve to keep the exchange rate afloat, there's nothing wrong with it. The governor himself, a week ago, has also said that, well, where is the sin? If the IMF wants us to add $400 million to our debt, our reserve, and we have managed to add more than $2 billion. Why can't we intervene in the market when people need the forex? And so currently what is happening is that the Bank of Ghana has both the rates and the dollar. So they are able to control what happens in the black market. Because once Bank of Ghana has the supply, it actually helps in stabilizing the city. Yesterday, he gave a clear plan on what they will do to keep the city afloat for the remaining part of the year, the second half of the year. And he said he is very confident that the appreciation we have seen will be sustained. And these are the numbers, not just against the dollar, but against other other major trading currencies, the pound, the euro, all of them appreciating so much in the first half of the year. One success story that yesterday he was very particular about is inflation. But many have said that, well, we are not happy yet. Why? Because inflation is 13.7%, but your policy rate is still 28%. The business community are calling that cut rate. And yesterday we saw Trump and Jerome Powell in that famous video where he said, I want you to cut rates. Why? Because Trump understands the importance of cutting rates. And businesses are also aware that once you cut the monetary policy rate, that is when the current, joy we are seeing, the inflation, going towards will make sense because cost of borrowing will go down. And once you begin to make the VAT more attractive and less burdensome, and you reduce the cost of borrowing, private sector can now lead the 24-hour economy. But we can't celebrate yet.
Sorry, but is it not the fear of the people who manage this to say, when you lower the rate, it could then affect even the inflation you are trying to reduce, and that's why we say let's target it or maintain it at a certain point. But so if they reduce the rate, won't it affect the inflation?
But inflation doesn't just work alone. It has to work with the policy rate. And usually they move in a tangent form, like they are more tangential, if not asymptotic. But what we have seen is the wide. It's not about just reducing, but is a gap between the inflation rate and the policy rate, where you have policy rates around 28%, and inflation rate around 13.7. It shows some of the imbalances and the structural challenges the Ghanaian economy still has. It means that once you begin to even lower monetary policy rates, you may have all other, indicators distorting because of that cascading effect that could bring. But once you are able to build a very good foundation and the fundamentals are very good, you can decide to then close the gap between monetary policy rate and inflation and lower the cost of borrowing for private persons to enjoy capital.
Okay.
Fuel prices was one of the success stories, but there's more here
for me.